Section 1 of Happy Jack. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jude Summers. Happy Jack by Thornton W. Burgess. Section 1. Happy Jack drops a nut, the quarrel, and Striped Chipmunk is kept very busy. Chapter 1. Happy Jack drops a nut. Save a little every day, and for the future put away. Happy Jack Squirrel sat on the tip of one of the highest branches of a big hickory tree. Happy Jack was up very early that morning. In fact, jolly round red Mr. Sun was still in his bed behind the purple hills when Happy Jack hopped briskly out of bed. He washed himself thoroughly and was ready for business by the time Mr. Sun began his climb up in the blue, blue sky. You see, Happy Jack had found that big hickory tree just loaded with nuts, all ripe and ready to gather. He was quite sure that no one else had found that special tree, and he wanted to get all the nuts before anyone else found out about them. So he was all ready, and off he raced to the big tree just as soon as it was light enough to see. The nuts that grow in that hickory tree, they're all for me, they're all for me. Happy Jack was humming that little song as he rested for a few minutes, way up in the top of the tree, and wondered if his storehouse would hold all these big fat nuts. Just then, he heard a great scolding a little way over in the green forest. Happy Jack stopped humming and listened. He knew that voice. It was his cousin's voice, the voice of Chatterer the Red Squirrel. Happy Jack frowned. "I hope he won't come over this way," muttered Happy Jack. He does not love his cousin Chatterer anyway. And then there was the big tree full of hickory nuts. He didn't want Chatterer to find that. I'm afraid that Happy Jack was selfish. There were more nuts than he could possibly eat in one winter, and yet he wasn't willing that his cousin, Chatterer the Red Squirrel, should have a single one. Now, Chatterer is short-tempered and a great scold. Someone or something had upset him this morning, and he was scolding as fast as his tongue could go as he came running right toward the tree in which Happy Jack was sitting. Happy Jack sat perfectly still and watched. He didn't move so much as the tip of his big gray tail. Would Chatterer go past and not see that big tree full of nuts? It looked very much as if he would, for he was so busy scolding that he wasn't paying much attention to other things. Happy Jack smiled as Chatterer came running under the tree without once looking up. He was so tickled that he started to hug himself and didn't remember that he was holding a big fat nut in his hands. Of course, he dropped it. Where do you think it went? Well, sir, it fell straight down from the top of that tall tree, and it landed right on the head of Chatterer the Red Squirrel. "My stars!" cried Chatterer, stopping his scolding and his running altogether and rubbing his head where the nut had hit him. Then he looked up to see where it had come from. Of course, he looked straight up at Happy Jack. "You did that purposely!" screamed Chatterer, his short temper flaring up. "I didn't," snapped Happy Jack. "You did!" "I didn't." Oh, dear, 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 such a sight. Two little squirrels, one in a gray suit and one in a red suit, contradicting each other and calling names. It was such a sad, sad sight, for you know, they were cousins. Chapter 2. The Quarrel. It's up to you and up to me to see how thrifty we can be, to do our bit like soldiers true. It's up to me and up to you. Two angry little people were making a dreadful noise in the green forest. It was a beautiful morning, a very beautiful fall morning, but the beauty of it was being spoiled by the dreadful noise of these two little people. You see, they were quarreling. Yes, sir, they were quarreling, and it wasn't at all nice to see or nice to hear. You know who they were. One was Happy Jack Squirrel, who wears a coat of gray, and the other was Chatterer the red squirrel, who always wears a red coat with a vest of white. When Happy Jack had dropped that nut from the tip-top of the tall hickory tree, and it had landed right on top of Chatterer's head, it really had been an accident. All the time, Happy Jack had been sitting as still could be, hoping that his cousin Chatterer would pass by without looking up, and so seeing the big fat nuts in the top of that tree. You see, Happy Jack was greedy and wanted all of them himself. Now, Chatterer the red squirrel has a sharp temper, and also he has sharp eyes. All the time he was scolding Happy Jack and calling him names. Chatterer's bright eyes were taking note of all those big fat hickory nuts, and his mouth began to water. Without wasting any more time, he started up the tree to get some. Happy Jack grew very angry indeed. He hurried down to meet Chatterer the red squirrel and to prevent him climbing the tree. "You keep out of this tree, it's mine!" he shrieked. "No such thing, you don't own the tree, and I've got as much right here as you have," screamed Chatterer, dodging around to the other side of the tree. "'Tis too mine, I found it first," shouted Happy Jack. "You're a thief, so there!" "I'm not." "You are." "You're a pig, Happy Jack. You're just a great big pig." "I'm not a pig. I found these nuts first, and I tell you, they're mine," shrieked Happy Jack, so angry that every time he spoke, he jerked his tail. And all the time, he was chasing round and round the trunk of the tree, trying to prevent Chatterer getting up. Now, Happy Jack is ever so much bigger than his cousin Chatterer, but he isn't as spry. So, in spite of him, Chatterer got past, and like a little red flash was up in the top of the tree where the big fat nuts were. But he didn't have time to pick even one, for after him came Happy Jack, so angry that Chatterer knew that he would fare badly if Happy Jack should catch him. Round and round, over and across, this way and that way, in the top of the tall hickory tree, raced Chatterer the red squirrel, with his cousin, Happy Jack the gray squirrel, right at his heels, and calling him everything bad to be thought of. Yes, indeed, it was truly dreadful. And Peter Rabbit, who happened along just then, put his hands over his ears so as not to hear such a dreadful quarrel. Chapter 3. Striped Chipmunk is kept very busy. I prefer big acorns, but I never refuse little ones. They fit in between. Striped Chipmunk was sitting just inside a hollow log, studying about how he could fill up his new storehouse for the winter. Striped Chipmunk is very thrifty. He likes to play, and he is one of the merriest of all the little people who live on the green meadows or in the green forest. He lives right on the edge of both and knows everybody, and everybody knows him. Almost every morning, the merry little breezes of Old Mother West Wind hurry over to have a frolic with him the very first thing. But though he dearly loves to play, he never lets play interfere with work. Whatever he does, be it play or work, he does with all his might. I love the sun, I love the rain, I love to work, I love to play. Whatever it may bring to me, I love each minute of each day. So said Striped Chipmunk as he sat in the hollow log and studied how he could fill that splendid big new storehouse. Pretty soon, he pricked up his funny little ears. What was all that noise over in the green forest? Striped Chipmunk peeped out of the hollow log. Over in the top of a tall hickory tree, a terrible fuss was going on. Striped Chipmunk listened. He heard angry voices, such angry voices. They were the voices of his big cousins, Happy Jack the gray squirrel and Chatterer the red squirrel. Dear me, how those two do quarrel! I must go over and see what it is all about, thought Striped Chipmunk. So, with a little flirt of his funny little tail, he scampered out of the hollow log and over to the tall hickory tree. He knew all about that tree. Many times he had looked up at the big fat nuts in the top of it, watching them grow bigger and fatter, and hoping that when they grew ripe, Old Mother West Wind would find time to shake them down to him. You know, Striped Chipmunk is not much of a climber, so he cannot go up and pick the nuts as do his big cousins, Happy Jack and Chatterer. When he reached the tall hickory tree, what do you think was happening? Why, those big fat nuts were rattling down to the ground on every side, just as if Old Mother West Wind was shaking the tree as hard as she could. But Old Mother West Wind wasn't there at all. No, sir, there wasn't even one of the Merry Little Breezes up in the treetops. Those big fat nuts were rattling down just on account of the dreadful quarrel of Striped Chipmunk's two foolish cousins, Happy Jack and Chatterer. It was all because Happy Jack was greedy. Chatterer had climbed the tree, and now Happy Jack, who is bigger but not so spry, was chasing Chatterer round and over the treetop, and both were so angry that they didn't once notice that they were knocking down the very nuts over which they were quarreling. Striped Chipmunk didn't stop to listen to the quarrel. No, siree! He stuffed a big fat nut in each pocket in his cheeks and scampered back to his splendid new storehouse as fast as his little legs would take him. Back and forth, scampered Striped Chipmunk, and all the time he was laughing inside and hoping his big cousins would keep right on quarreling. End of section 1.